This is Tyrannus Acre Forward, the ag industry's most thought-provoking podcast. Listen to interesting people as we go in-depth into the issues affecting crop advisors, growers, and farm communities, uncovering the truth about the ag business and using technology to prepare for the unforeseeable. Ready to explore the future? Let's dig in.
I'd like to introduce you to Joe Stough today. Joe, good morning. How are you?
Great. Good morning, Mike.
So, Joe, tell us a little about yourself. You've got quite a career. So, first, what is it that you're doing these days? And then we'll get into your background a little bit and how you know Tyrannus and what we're doing.
Okay. Yeah, my primary focus these days is as a connection with Tyrannus, as you know. I'm running Fly Guys, a aerial data capture marketplace that we've, for the last year or so, been transforming to stand up a nationwide process for aerial data capture, not only in agriculture, but in about 30 other vertical markets as well, with agriculture being a really strategic priority for us.
Yeah, I think for our listeners and the folks that subscribe to this, what's really interesting is you're developing a network kind of end-to-end to connect people who want to fly and can fly with the opportunities to do that work across many verticals, agriculture being one of them. So we're going to talk a lot more about that as we get into getting to know you. But if you're tuning in, the world of ag has changed and the world of drone services has changed. And we live in a world today where I can order food to my office right now with a click of a button. I know you know something about that, Joe, and I can even order a ride somewhere. Now we're getting to a place where if you want to find work, you can literally dial it up on the internet if you have the right skill set, certifications, and find gainful employment doing things that people really want and need, including in agriculture. So I find that really interesting. But before we get into that, I want to tease this out a little bit. Tell us a little bit about you and where you're from, Joe. So where are you from? What are your hobbies? What are you into?
All right, I'm from Lake Charles, Louisiana. That's where I grew up and where I currently live. And as far as hobbies, pretty much the hobbies that most people in Southwest Louisiana have. A lot of outdoors, hunting and fishing. I own a 1,000-acre rice farm about 40 miles east of Lake Charles, which anytime between September and February, especially on weekends, you can find me there. But that's the duration, the time frame of duck hunting, which is my primary hobby. But we also, living in Lake Charles, Louisiana, we're on the water. So we're about a 30-minute boat ride to the Gulf of Mexico. So we have a boat that we can get to in 30 minutes to an hour. We're in the Gulf of Mexico, chasing red snapper. On the way back in, we can catch shrimp and crabs and flounder and redfish. So it's Louisiana is sportsman's paradise, and where we live, that describes my hobby, my whole family's hobbies, really.
Now, that sounds like a lot of fun. I know it's a different kind of crop when you deal with rice, and obviously the hunting is a bit different. You can even hunt gator there, which is, for most of our audience in the corn and bean world, that's not a common occurrence, I would say.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, even on a rice farm, we have canals that we use as our source of water for rice. And as most people know, I would think, rice entails a heavy water usage, and throughout the growing season is growing in water, a few inches of water, but it's too shallow for a gator. But however, the canals that you use to feed the fields are loaded with gators. So we get gator tags every year, and we hand them off to gator hunters that come in and take them off our land for us.
That's pretty interesting. It's a different kind of agriculture and opportunity there in Louisiana.
Yeah.
You also face a lot of different things with the amount of humidity and heat and the pressures that brings to a crop as well. And we show a lot of disease and insect pressure, but as you go south, as you have more humidity, you see a lot more in those crops. So very, very interesting area in geography. So growing up in Lake Charles, how did you end up in a space now? Let's go back into your background. So you've had a few companies, you've been in the tech world, you have a connection to ag by virtue of where you're from.
Yeah.
But how did you end up? You went to UC Santa Barbara, right?
Yeah, I got there through baseball. So, Southwestern Louisiana boy, but I played baseball. Took me out to California conveniently because I found myself really interested in writing software, and California was a great place to be a software developer. This was back in the late 80s, early 90s, and started my first software company on the West Coast. So it was fortunate that baseball took me out there and hooked me into the career that I've been in for now 30 years.
So what was your background, UC Santa Barbara? It's math and statistics, is that correct?
That's correct. I have a master's degree in applied statistics. And while I was in grad school, started writing software and got out with a master's because I wanted to go and start my own software company, essentially. And while I was in grad school there, I wrote my first software program, which ran the housing department, and realized that really writing software and database software was what I wanted to do for the rest of my career.
So did you happen to like baseball because you like statistics, or did you like statistics because you like baseball?
That's an interesting question. Well, I think what got me into statistics was I liked math, and I was in the PhD program for math my first year, but learned how to write database software that first summer, and went back to the dean of the university and said, I need to get out and write software. And he said, well, statistics is a great field that you can transition into, get your master's and go do that. So that was after I'd played college baseball. But then those two things intersected, and the very first program, I guess, would have been commercial program that I designed was a baseball statistics application, but it was too early.
It was before the Moneyball.
It was a few years before Moneyball.
So you were Moneyball before Moneyball.
Yeah, the Moneyball that didn't come to fruition before the real one did. I had to pivot because the college coaches weren't ready for that sophisticated level of data capture, and then the analytics, and then the interpretation of those analytics that now are called sabermetrics, which you've heard if you've watched Moneyball. And so I had to pivot into just developing a software company, and I did that in the mid-90s and became my first software business.
I think we'll probably talk about that dynamic here as we think about your career and the things you've done, because it's one thing to have a technology, it's another thing to be ready to deploy and have an industry accept and use it. And so that's a great example where the ideas are there, but the execution and then the readiness or the other considerations need to be met before things can really move forward and be adopted. So real quick on stats, what is applied statistics? What's the difference between applied statistics and, say, statistics? Just are these stats that you use? Is that what that means?
Yeah, applied statistics like using multivariate regression, which actually the sabermetrics is a good example.
Okay.
Bill James he's kind of the godfather of sabermetrics and baseball analytics, simply just took a whole bunch of different metrics like batting average, on-base percentage, slugging percentage, and a bunch of different ones, and he used regression-based statistics to use math to tell him which of these statistics have the biggest impact on winning games. So,
right, so that makes sense.
Statistical method. That's
right. So I'll try to break that down a little bit, because I think I know what you're saying is when we run regressions or mathematical equations, basically the closer to one, the more correlated, the more likely it impacts it. It's not causal, but it suggests that they're highly related when they look at patterns. So if I see a high batting average, I should also see a relationship with runs scored, correct?
There is a correlation there, not as high as you would naturally think, but
okay,
yes, you would want to see that relationship.
Right. So sometimes the things we look at and see, and we make connections to, the math when you put it together shows you things that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise known because they're complex.
Well, what's so useful about it is the math is giving you a pure measurement of the relationship. With the human eye, you think you see a relationship between A and B, and the math either tells you there really is one, or there's less of one than you thought.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think we'll get to that when we talk a little bit about acre forward stuff that we're doing, because I think it's a lot like baseball. Baseball, you've always had the stats, but as the computing power has come on, and now you have more ways to video and see any of these sports, we know what's going on. In agriculture, we've not been able to do that except for the last couple of years. And that's really not an overstatement. It's really only been the last 3 years that the right tech has come together to enable us to start looking at that. And so I know you've intersected with ag with what you're doing now with Fly Guys, and we're going to get to that. But before you got to Fly Guys, so you leave baseball and you wrote some code for the University of the Housing. Tell me where it went next and what you were doing.
Well, the next material thing that took place was in the mid-'90s. I started a software company. I moved from California to Texas, and started a software company that really became a heavy industry operational excellence software business. And heavy industry, I mean chemical companies. You think of the Gulf Coast, chemical companies, refineries, energy companies, energy, chemicals, nuclear, heavy manufacturing, that type of space. And we were writing really all kinds of software specifically for that space, but landed in an area called operational excellence, which really it comes out of safety, the combination of the practices that lead to better performance in safety, environmental, quality, security, reliability. You look at the thread that ties those together, and the practices to perform better in all of those areas is called operational excellence. And we built a software product in operational excellence in the late 90s. By the mid 2000s, the product was in 180 countries and 24 languages, and number one in the world in specifically the heavy industry market, but the really big global companies, that segment of the market is where we were strong.
And what did the software do? Like, is it focused on processes and monitoring processes and results? Or, I mean, how do you improve the output as well as the safety and the reliability through OpEx?
Okay, so the primary concept there is risk. So the two different ways risk are discovered. One is after an incident occurs, a defect or a loss happens because the risk was not mitigated. So think of a safety incident, an environmental incident, a quality incident. And so what our software did was it took those incidents and provided a process for thoroughly analyzing the circumstances around the incident, performing root cause analysis, identifying those causes, and then assigning accountability to fix those causes, not only where the incident happened, but throughout the whole rest of the company where those same circumstances exist and it could happen elsewhere. And that's the reactive side of discovering a risk. The proactive side is where an observation, an inspection, a assessment, an audit of many different types occurs, and weaknesses that could lead to a loss are found, essentially risk that could lead to a loss are found. And those same weaknesses are assigned action items and accountability in the same way. And our software handled all of those business processes. And when you went into a company, take an ExxonMobil, Exxon had our software in every employee in the world, all 90,000 Exxon employees, and at Shell, 128,000 Shell employees, everyone with a user code and a user of our software. We had to go in and take the way that they had previously been managing, let's say, safety incident investigations or quality audits, and map out their business process and then configure our software to meet that process and roll it out worldwide. And that's the steps that it took to implement an operational excellence software program that really automated those business processes for identifying risk that could cause loss in either safety, environmental, quality, reliability, and so on.
I think that's a similar process, that idea that, so we look at agriculture and the things that we're trying to do as an industry is we get an outcome and we want to understand what contributed to that outcome. In this case, it could be a good outcome, could be a bad outcome, say the yield, or what happens in a crop. And we need to understand how those elements stack together correlated with the outcome. That's something that's hard to do in ag given all the variables. So we probably will come back and talk a little bit more about that one as well. But then you have the proactive side where you see things. You're saying that your software, you could put in things, I guess, during a process, and it would assess maybe the risk or potential risks that were ahead, as well as
they would put in, they would identify what they saw as the potential risk through a practice that they've probably been doing for decades, where it's an audit or maybe a local weekly inspection. And through that practice, they identify a risk that could cause human loss or environmental loss. And that practice of performing the audit and then identifying the findings from the audit and assigning accountability was all done in our software. So they'd have one platform for managing all of the accountabilities throughout the company or responsibilities throughout the company for mitigating risk to loss.
And so with that company, I'm assuming there was some sort of exit or, path forward, because you then transitioned to something else. So what happened? Like, how did you go from that company to your next venture, if you will, Joe?
Okay. So in 2010, the company was purchased September 21st, 2010 by a global data analytics company, is maybe the easiest way to explain it. A company that previously was called IHS. They've since merged and then been purchased. So, if you look up IHS, you may not find a lot right now.
Right.
But at that time, they were really big in analytics, especially in the energy industry. And their energy industry analytics arm came back and said the CEOs want to see data and performance on environmental health and safety. And in this space called operational excellence. So they would like to see analytics. And we had by far the largest collective data set when you cut across our customers. So we sold the company in 2010 to IHS.
And then after you exited there, what was your next venture? What did you go into next, Joe?
Yeah, so after that exit, I ended up going back and helping IHS build analytics benchmarking capabilities for my customer base. And then while I was doing that, I was approached with an idea. I was also investing in other tech companies. And I was approached with an idea in 2013 for a food delivery app in late 2013, which at the time, especially in Southwest Louisiana, was not heard of.
Right.
We thought it was the first one of its kind. We found out later that there were other companies that were alive at that time, that like Grubhub and DoorDash. But at that time, we thought it was this revolutionary idea. Invested in that company, got on the board in early 2014, helped put the board together with some of my prior board members from my prior business. And then in 2016, I stepped in and eventually became the president and COO. And then in 2018, we took the company public in November of 18. So about 5 years from a screenshot on the phone to being a public company.
That's a pretty big achievement. Tell me a little bit, what's it like to take an idea like that and start to build a company? What were the things that surprised you when you say, look, I'm going to build, I guess, an app that allows me to connect restaurants with people and allow them to place orders, make orders, take orders, track orders? Seems simple, right, as a concept. What's it really like to start a business like that? What surprised you about it?
Yeah. I'll tell you what, probably the biggest surprise was how strong the vacuum was. But we didn't know. And I feel like, in a way, with the field that Fly Guys and Tyrannus are in together, we're on the front end of that bell curve and feeling some of those same things. Okay. So when we started putting together the company to really, in food delivery, it's a three-sided marketplace. You have a consumer that's hungry and a driver that has a car and is willing to go to a restaurant and pick up the food for you. But in the middle is what we call the partner, which is a restaurant that's making the food. And so putting all three of those pieces together on one platform so all three can collaborate simply for the purpose of satisfying the hunger of an individual that would like to eat food from a particular restaurant Putting all that together in, I'd say, 14, early 15, we had no idea that once we stood it up and we started using digital marketing, which was also in a fairly early stage, Facebook marketing to reach the potential consumers, and how fast we would go from 0 orders to 100 orders a day in some of these markets, or then eventually get to 1,000 orders a day. That's what was so shocking, was that the demand was so strong for that, and you had no way to know because there was no precedent. There wasn't a prior scenario that could have given you a model for what you were about to run into in terms of how strong that demand was going to be.
And what did that mean for the business?
We are.
Yeah, what did that mean for the business? How did that challenge you and your teams?
So it meant scale. It meant scalability. It meant growing really fast, hiring lots of people day after day, and bringing them into an organizational process that had to be structured and ready for scale. Because if they came into chaos, our quality would suffer, our churn would increase, the customers wouldn't get what they expected in the amount of time they expected, our partners wouldn't be getting the results that they expected. And really what that ties back to is operational excellence. We found out really early, as we were scaling so fast, that if we didn't structure our processes in such a way that we'd be ready to scale, we were going to run into a ceiling. And so we brought the practices. I even hired some of the leaders from my prior business to come in and created an operational excellence department in Waiter. We didn't have a lot of safety risk, but we had a lot of service quality risk, like food showing up in an hour and 30 minutes and it's cold. And with thousands or tens of thousands of orders a day, there's a lot of opportunity for that to happen. We applied those same practices, allowed us to scale really fast and keep our quality high and keep our foothold in the markets we were in really strong.
That's it's amazing how quickly how quickly something like that can grow. So how big did it get? How could you describe to somebody going from nothing to what? Like, how many orders, how many programmers did you have? Like, how did this thing grow in 5 years?
So we had 0 in 2014. At the beginning of 2019, we were $200 million in annual revenue.
I'm sorry, say that again?
So we were obviously 0 at inception in early 14. Yep. And 5 years later, in early 2019, we were $200 million in annual revenue.
Yeah, I'm pausing for a second because I want to make sure I heard that correctly. You took a company from nothing, developed software to connect hungry people with restaurants and drivers to $200 million in annual revenue
over a 5-year period, right?
That's significant growth. So,
yeah,
you're a statistician. What was highly correlated with that success and that outcome?
Well, as I was saying, first of all, the demand, the product market fit. No one would have known that the market was in that much demand. There was that much demand in the market for ordering food from a restaurant at your house. No one had predicted that. But first, you had to have that. And then what we needed to do was scale the company really fast to fill that vacuum as fast as we could. But if we didn't do it with quality, it was going to be short term. So we had to fill that vacuum with quality execution so that we would keep the restaurant relationships, keep the customer relationships, and grow year over year. If we really into these markets really fast and had a bad quality result, well, then we would have a lot of churn. And the next year, we'd have to refill all that business to have the growth. But we had 200% and 300% year over year growth. That if we'd had a lot of churn, we wouldn't have been able to achieve that.
How were you able to get the attention of the restaurants to engage with this opportunity, and then the drivers? How did you find all of these people and make it easy to work with?
Interesting.
Your company. Yep.
Yeah. So with the restaurants, we had a function in our business that was just focused on partner success. So we viewed the restaurants as a partner, not a customer, because their success led to ours. If they had more customers feeding from them, and they were growing their business, then we were growing ours because we were a marketplace. So we had a department that was just purely focused on restaurant success and worked with the partners to assure that their business outcomes were being met. And then on the driver's side, we had within each market that we would go into, we would, at that time, Uber was just getting traction. There was a lot of the cities that we were going into didn't even have Uber.
Okay.
So they had heard of Uber. One of the strategies we had, we called it the Walmart strategies. If you remember Walmart initially, when it came out, Sam Walton put all of his stores in small rural communities.
Yes.
And then only moved into the bigger cities later. Well, so that was our strategy. We wanted to put our capabilities in cities that within 2015, 2016, Uber Eats and Grubhub were starting to raise their head in the big markets, but they weren't touching the 50,000 to 500,000 population cities. And so that was our target. And we would go into those cities. Well, when we hit one of those markets, for one, the restaurants didn't have another player like us that was scaled and could scale with quality and rapidly. And then all the people in the city that represent the driver demand for even a service like Uber had no alternatives. Uber wasn't there yet. Rideshare wasn't there. And certainly none of the other food delivery apps were there. So we brought that opportunity that gave a lot of the employees, a lot of the residents in a community an opportunity to make more money. It's sometimes a side job, sometimes their only job. But the vacuum was also pretty hot on that side as well.
So a lot of demand in general. And then how did you make your product easy for people to work with?
Yeah, so that question you would have to ask in three different ways, because we had a consumer-facing product, so that's the individual that's receiving the goods, that you'd want it to be easy for them to submit an order and transparent for them to track an order. Okay. So they could see that, hey, I submitted the order 17 minutes ago. Where is it? Well, it's being prepared, or it's been prepared, it's being packaged and waiting on the driver, or the driver has it and is bringing it to you and it should be there in X amount of time. So that consumer-facing app needed to meet their needs. And then we had a partner-facing app, a dashboard for the restaurant, where the restaurant could track all of their business for the day, for the week, project out their business going forward. And so we designed that app specifically to meet their business objectives. And then you have a driver app. And, the driver is basically running their own little one-man sole proprietor or one-woman sole proprietor business. And so we want to make it easy for them to pick up new business, track their opportunities, optimize their business. So that app was built for their business outcomes. So it was really three different apps that we were building to fill the needs for the three different legs of that marketplace.
That's very interesting. I think we're, as Tyrannus working with you at Fly Guys, and we look at the industry, we work through and with agricultural retailers and cooperatives as our partner or a customer, and then they have the consumer, which is the grower, and then we work with service providers that obviously fly and acquire the insights. So very similar setup and analogy, just different industry, obviously different challenges, different methods. So it sounds like you've been around these kinds of problems for some period of time. So following Waiter, I'll go back to this because I think a lot of people are going to have questions. You go from 0 to 200 million. There's a lot you're learning and a lot that you're seeing. So we'll keep that in mind as we talk about moving forward. Tell us a little bit about how you went from Waiter, so it's wait with an R, to what you're doing today. So I know you're involved in a lot of things. What's your primary focus these days, Joe?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, Fly Guys.
Fly Guys.
Coming out of Waiter, I resigned as the president and COO 1 year after we went public. So I essentially committed to stay around long enough to see the transition through being public. Really didn't have an intent of staying on and running a public company at that point in my early 50s, and that just wasn't my desired occupation. So resigned in 1 year later in late 2019, stepped right into COVID after that, as everyone knows. And found myself within a few months sitting on a half dozen boards. And at that point, intended really to be a board member and investor and provide assistance and advice to the leadership team of the companies that I've invested in and sitting on the board of. And then after getting more involved with Fly Guys and seeing some of the same characteristics we just talked about the food delivery marketplace and the demand, and seeing the front end of that demand curve, and seeing a lot of those same signals, seeing an organization that was young and needed to rapidly mature and to have more scalable processes and technology as an opportunity for me to bring my skills. And I made the decision to go from, a full-time board member scattered across a half dozen companies to a full-time CEO, and stepped in from chairman. I had invested in Fly Guys a year and a half ago and took the chairman of the board seat, stepped into CEO a few months ago and made the decision I'm going to make this permanent, raised capital, and applying that capital to build a marketplace platform very similar to what we did for Waiter, but to go after the analogy that exists in the aerial data capture marketplace.
So tell me a little bit about that platform and Fly Guys for people who may not know. So somebody listening to here's Fly Guys, marketplace platforms, a lot of business stuff there. What is it that you do at Fly Guys?
Yeah, so the easy way to say it is we connect typically a company, but it could be an individual, with demand for aerial data with a supplier.
Okay.
And between those two, maybe in most cases is a partner that is essential to that relationship, because they're the ones actually with the ingredients to make the product that the demand side requires. So the three-sided marketplace analogy fits perfectly in this scenario. You have the consumer, which could be a company that needs aerial data, could be a construction company that needs their construction job to be flown once a week. It could be a real estate investment trust, for example, that holds a bunch of assets that they need to continue to maintain, and they need to fly their real estate once a year. It could be a solar panel company, a company that owns solar farms,
right,
that needs to do inspections on their solar farms. It could be a cell tower company. There's about 30 different vertical markets, one of which is agriculture, and all these companies represent the demand side. And what we're specifically looking for is those companies that have high frequency demand. Agriculture represents high frequency demand because of the nature of the work that you're doing, where you're wanting to fly the same acreage multiple times as the growing season progresses. So that defines high frequency demand. That's on the demand side. On the supply side are about 300,000 individuals who have an FAA license to fly a drone commercially. And those individuals are just that. They're typically individuals. They may have their own little LLC. They may have an LLC with a few, friends or colleagues that they fly jobs together, but they typically don't have a scaled operation behind them. Optimized business processes and the ability to deliver anywhere in the country. They typically are kind of regionally focused, maybe even focused with competency in one vertical. So you have that being the supply side, the demand side that I described earlier. And then that partner in the middle is an analytics company like Tyrannus, that if all you had was the data coming from a pilot going over the fence to a grower, they would get little to no value out of it. They would get a picture of their plants. But the Tyrannus provides the artificial intelligence and the know-how to identify problems and identify opportunities for the grower to intervene and optimize their outcome. Lower costs for applying the chemicals to improve their yields, and then higher yields. And so it takes those three pieces together to make up the design that we have for the Fly Guys marketplace. So very analogous to what we did with food delivery.
No, it's very, very interesting how these things come together. 3.5 years ago, kind of the commercial product that you see now, our Acre Forward Intelligence suite of solutions. The drones didn't quite even exist to do what we're able to do today. The pilot demand or supply, the vacuum wasn't as strong. And so what we've seen change in just 3 years, Joe, is we used to make our own drones because drones didn't exist or they went obsolete to actually carry a payload. Then the optics get better, so we're able to actually stop constructing our own pods and use fully integrated optics and drones that come from places like DJI. And we run the world's largest fleet through drone service provider networks, but we used to build and hire those pilots one-off here and there, different ways that we built systems and we worked with it. Now we've met you and your company as part of what we're doing, and you said 300,000 in the U.S. alone, currently licensed. That just keeps growing. So we're in a different world. I think really for the audience, that's what's new is drones have been around for some time, but the battery technology, the energy technology, the optics, those have all dramatically changed in a matter of 3 or 4 years. And the other change that comes with it is the supply of people to actually operate these things, right? So you've seen that dramatically change across all sectors. You like agriculture because of its high frequency. What are other reasons that agriculture is a good segment or vertical for a company like Fly Guys and aerial imagery?
Well, one thing that I like about agriculture is the seasonality of it.
Okay.
And you have a extremely high frequency demand season and then an off season. And that fits the unique nature of our strategy to build a marketplace that connects demand and supply throughout the year. So you may have for 4 months pilots that are largely dedicated to your agriculture work.
Yes.
But after those 4 months, you don't have to work for them for the next 8 months. Whereas on the Fly Guys platform, they'll go from 4 months of 5 to 6 days a week flying, corn and soybean or cotton fields to flying cell towers, roofs and parking lots, solar panels, construction projects. So it gives us the opportunity to build up one of the key strategies that we need to build that flywheel for success in the market is high density of competent pilots in every geography. So agriculture has such a high frequency demand during those 4 months. We have to implement a high density of capable pilots throughout those geographies. But then for the next 8 months, we now have that high density of capable pilots to use for our couple dozen other vertical markets or use cases. And when we find demand in those other use cases, we know we have that supply, and that creates that flywheel. The demand is getting service better, the suppliers are getting more jobs, both sides are happy, and they continue to interact with our marketplace.
I think it's really important because we get this question a lot is how do you get this done? What do you do? Well, first, every year that goes by, the easier this gets in terms of you get different challenges, but the more people that are available to actually do this work. And what I like about this conversation is for the ag advisors, for the growers that are listening to this, that's the question is where do these pilots come from? The reality is there's organizations like yours, and yours is rather unique in the way you're connecting various service providers as well into your system, is you're able to align 12 months worth of work and split out 4 or 5 months that are needed for agriculture, but keep those folks gainfully employed in the rural markets in which they serve, doing other projects, right? So these same assets, these same people are able to be used more fully throughout the year because of the work that Fly Guys is doing.
Yep, exactly. And it keeps their competency high. So they're continuously throughout the year doing lots of different types of jobs. And we're building the learning management system into our platform to provide the pilots, the supply side, with opportunities to continuously sharpen their skills.
So let's dive into that, because since I've been doing this, we have Tyrannus Academy, we've trained, we have operations managers, we've had to train basically a very large network of pilots to do this. And we're actually pretty good at that. But you mentioned 0 to 200 million. Life starts to change and you start to have to focus and work with partners. How is Fly Guys doing this differently, and how do you feel like you're creating added value? Because you mentioned learning management, training. I understand connecting pilots. What is this stuff about training pilots for jobs? What do you guys do that's unique there?
Okay, interesting. Yeah. So when you look at standing up maybe 100 pilots or 200 pilots, and you run them all through manual training, they have to go to a physical location. They have to get trained by an individual. And there's a lot of manual touch points for the competency development for an individual pilot. 100 pilots to 200 pilots, that's getting challenging. Take that to 1,000 pilots, or 10,000 pilots. If you just 10x the acreage that you're doing right now, you're looking at thousands of pilots in order to meet that requirement. You need scalable, repeatable processes that minimize the human touch for that, but yet can produce that competency outcome that you need. Well, there are LMS programs that allow us to build SOPs, training programs with videos, with certification tests that are required to break up the different pieces of competency needed to fly a corn crop, for example, successfully, maybe differently at each stage of the growing season, and all of that electronically delivered such that pilots can go in and develop a competency in this area in February or March, and now they're available as part of the inventory to go and fly during the growing season. But they can also take that same concept to cell towers or other types of jobs that require some unique skill and develop that skill through a learning management system online program. And that makes it's good for the demand side because they have reliable, competent pilots. It's good for the pilot because as the pilot goes in and takes on more of these LMS modules and develops qualification or certification for the different use cases, they now have more opportunity to fly, and they have more opportunity to make money with their own little LLC.
So the reason, if I'm a drone pilot operator of any sort, and I want to make a living to do that, the reason I would work with Fly Guys is not just that you're showing me there's a job and this is where I can do the job. You're actually giving me the skill sets or the opportunities to be certified and competent. Therefore, I'm attractive and I'm more likely to have a steady, gainful income using assets that I have or that are provided, doing a job for third parties.
Yep.
So the world's changing, right? Is you can order food at your house. You can order a car. Heck, you can even order a subscription to vehicles if you like changing cars. You don't want to keep buying them, right, to your home. And now you can order your job as long as you place a certain amount of competency and you show that you're willing to do it. So what is it that you guarantee to companies like Taranis as Fly Guys? Like what's obviously a supply of pilots? Do you guarantee their quality and work given that you're doing the training?
So we guarantee our level of service quality, meaning local capability everywhere.
Okay.
So we don't have a particular geography where we can provide resources. Our area of operation is the United States of America. So what we're providing is a process for identifying and delivering a competent pilot that has the equipment and the skill set to deliver the data that's required for that particular project or that particular use case, as opposed to just being a network that connects pilots and the demand side without any interest in assuring that the pilots are certified or competent, that they deliver quality work. So
right. So you're not ZipRecruiter for pilots.
Right.
You're actually creating a way for them to certify what they're able to do and have gainful employment, but you're connecting businesses and marketplaces. So that's really interesting that exists. I think that's, for me, we get the question all the time, how do you do these things? Well, that answer changes every year for us at Taranis because we've had to do some of this on our own, and then we meet partners like Fly Guys, and that where you intend to be from this year to next year is going to be very different as you grow year on year, right? So how many pilots would Fly Guys work with in a year?
Well, we have 7,000 pilots in our network right now.
7,000.
7,000. And we intend to grow that, I would say 10x in the next 2 to 3 years.
That's amazing. And you're pretty confident in that growth number given the population that's out there, the adoption that you're seeing?
Well, if you look at some of the analysts that are projecting the number of FAA certified drone pilots,
yep,
the projection is around 800,000 to 1 million within the next few years. So that just means and look at the technology, the quality, like you were saying earlier.
So much better.
The capability of the technology is going up and the cost is going down. So that just the economics create an opportunity for more people to latch a hold of that device and then use it to create an income for themselves.
I think that's really a key point, because I get this question, like, what is it that you do? 3-4 years ago, people would ask about this, and it sounds crazy, right? Drones over crops. Every year we do this, you start to hear different questions. And for us, yep, we could have a bunch of drones out there. We don't have to make them anymore. We don't have to do our own optics. We can use what's in the market. We've done a really good job sourcing and getting skilled labor to do this. But that's, as we scale, we have to scale with partners. And what this conversation showing is that there are new companies that are rising up that see that opportunity to meet that challenge as we grow. So the question is, scale is not one that Taranis will do on its own, but rather the market, companies like Fly Guys, other companies are doing things in concert with Taranis, right? So DJI has done some things with their drones. You're doing some things with a marketplace. So we can focus on the artificial intelligence and the analytics and our specialized operational needs with partners like you to make sure that this is done. The drones get easier, the flying gets easier, they get smaller, they get cheaper, but it's still a people business. And I think that's what I really wanted to get out from this conversation is you wake up every day just thinking about how to connect people. And that's what we think about. We're thinking about, yep, we can analyze, but we know what's happening on the acre to a leaf level. But every day we wake up with our customer success team, focus on the experience of how do we connect an ag advisor sitting at retail or a cooperative, working with the grower and create a tighter connection with software. And I had a group I spoke to last week, and that's what makes a company successful versus not. Is you think about how people connect and you design around that, you'll have a successful business as long as you're meeting a need. I think in ag, the need is clear. No one's going to scout acres the way they did 5 years ago. It's inevitable that what we're doing is going to scale across the few million that it's on now to several millions of acres, because this is a highly efficient and effective way to know what's happening. So I'm going to go back to your statistics background. When we can record what's happening in a systematic, frequent way on the acre, now we understand the outcome we got a lot better. We understand how to repeat successful things and avoid things that don't correlate with success, right, Joe? And what's neat about what you do is you're taking that approach to a marketplace to skill up and connect skilled pilots to meet that need. But your background actually dovetails quite nicely with what we're doing on the acre from a stats point of view and understanding what's happening there. So it's interesting how those experiences converge when I look at your background and what Fly Guys is doing. And it's an interesting relationship. I wouldn't have predicted 3 years ago. I knew networks would grow, but I wouldn't have predicted that your company would exist the way it exists today to kind of solve that problem.
Yeah.
I guess that's the way a free market works, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's a big vacuum there. Someone's going to go fill it. And that's our strategy, is just that narrow function of collecting the data, but doing it at a really high scale and continuing to do it at a really high scale with high quality. Doing both scale and quality. That's the challenge that we're meeting. So
and most companies give up on one or the other, right? And we think you can have both. So we're approaching this the same way. And I think for people listening, they got to get to know Joe, because you don't know if you don't get to know Joe. I mean, I don't know many people who have you stayed narrowly focused on the OpEx, and you were focused on waiter, 0 to 200 million in revenue. There's not many people that can claim that. And so you've seen a lot, you understand a lot. So it's really a pleasure to be able to work with you as Tyrannus, because what you're seeing is the vacuum. You've seen these before. You're seeing the narrow but focused opportunity. And what we're solving are the two issues, quality and scale. And with Tyrannus partnering with Fly Guys, we're bringing together loads of expertise and experience to make sure these acres get done, that it's quality, and that the outputs are really correlated with their success. We're going to understand what's going on, and we're going to get it done. And I just think it's a pleasure to learn more from you. I hope we get to do this again, Joe, before we end the podcast here in the future, to learn a little bit more about your success, because there's so many things you've touched that you understand how to scale. Before we end the podcast, what I'm trying to get to here, what are the biggest things as a leader when you look at solving growth and scale issues, but maintaining quality? How do you make sure you keep a balance between those two as you grow a business? You've done this a few times. So what's the secret?
Yeah, so I guess this is going to sound like an overused word, but it's one that since about 2001, 2002, when my operational excellence software company started to go international and started to grow really, really fast, and could have gotten out of control, a focus of mine became leadership and culture. And really culture being the primary focus, staying focused on now the term that's used as human capital, but that element of your organization that keeps each department leader and each colleague within every department not only focused on the mission, but it's inspired by it and inspired by being a part of it, and having a balance in communications and a continuous focus on developing the interpersonal capability of each of the individuals. We have a program that I've used for 20 years that we use at Fly Guys, and I've used in my board seats with other companies, that maintains that. And that, without that, I think when you hit that hyper scale 200-300% growth, and you're putting a lot of pressure on the organization, which means on the people, the wheels start to rattle. If the team is built and they're ready for that hyper scale, they're ready to face that challenge, and you're constantly explicitly addressing the interpersonal dynamics of the team members, the leadership team, throughout the entire company, you're able to handle that uphill climb, that rapid uphill climb, without major consequences to losing key parts in your team and keeping the team together.
Yeah, I think, and this is why I wanted you on. I think we're going to have to go deeper, because we covered a lot of things. But, to play this back, you've led a lot of organizations and you've grown business well. And with all your background with stats and software, with all the things that are going on, when I asked you what it took to be successful, now that you've seen it from a lot of vantage points, the thing you came back to is focus on the interpersonal connections and being connected with a mission and being focused as a company.
Yes.
So the tech you can find, it's important, but the magic is really a focused mission and helping teams work better and I guess adapt to the challenges and overcome them as they arise as you do something new.
Yep.
That's good. Joe, this has been insightful for me. I took a lot, because I think at Tyrannus we do a lot of those things well, which is why I think we partner well with you and Fly Guys. But it's always a good reminder that whether you're a retailer with an agronomy team or a grower out there with a farm team to solve an issue, sometimes you need to back up a little bit and get focused on the mission and the outcome so you can make sure you take the right steps for success. So if folks want to find out a little bit more about you and Fly Guys, where do they go?
I guess I would say flyguys.com. That'd be the...
So whether I'm a fly guy or fly gal, I can go to flyguys.com, right, Joe? And we can connect to a lot of different cool ways to make a good living and build a skill set using aerial imagery at flyguys.com.
That's correct.
That's excellent. And anybody who's licensed should be able to go there and learn more.
And register.
If you're not licensed, can they connect with Fly Guys to find out more about how to do that and maybe what they need to do?
Absolutely. That's our pilot success department that you would get in touch with there, and they'll guide you through the process of getting the certification that you need and start connecting you to jobs.
That's fantastic. So for those listening, please go to flyguys.com. I want to thank Joe for joining us today. He's got quite a background and an extensive knowledge in not only stats, but leading and building companies to deal with scale and quality, challenges and opportunities in new markets. So sounds like a perfect partner for Trantis. So again, thanks for joining the discussion today, Joe.